A very good evening to all the attendees. Hope you're all safe and staying indoors. On behalf of the Prabha Khaitan Foundation, Mangalbagh Gallery, Karma Foundation, and Divya Bhaskar, I, Shanil Parekh, extend a warm welcome to all our invitees for the first virtual Right Circle in Ahmedabad. The rise of the COVID pandemic has prompted the world to find solutions to stay in touch with each other. And if at all we are to see a silver lining in this whole scenario, it is that this crisis has showed us how to live online and to use internet as it was always meant to be used, to connect with one another and share resources. With this in mind, the Prabha Khaitan Foundation has decided to move its session online. The foundation's activities are aimed to promote education, culture, art, and literature in India, whilst endorsing the importance of humanitarian and global issues like gender equality, women's empowerment, and their livelihood. One of their programs is the Right Circle. The aim of Right Circle is to provide a platform to the authors and select set of readers to exchange their thoughts and views to promote literary activities in India. It is supported by the Ehsaas Women in Ahmedabad, with the Karma Foundation as literary partner, the House of MG as hospitality partner, and Divya Bhaskar as the media partner for the event. This is the fourth event of the Right Circle in Ahmedabad. In the past, author Preeti Shenoy, Namita Devi Dayal, and Sundari Venkatraman have graced us with their presence. For today's event, we are fortunate to have with us Mr. Anand Neelakantan.
Hi.
He's a man who wears many hats. He's an Indian author, a columnist, a screenwriter, television personality, and motivational speaker. He has authored 5 fiction books in English and 1 in Malayalam. He is also signed with the producers of Bahubali, the blockbuster film, for a 3-book series based on their movie, and the series will be a prequel to the film. To be in conversation with him, we have our very own Ehsaas woman, Priyanshi Patel, who's a literature enthusiast herself. Post the session, if you all have any questions for the author, please click on the raise your hand button. Enjoy the session. Priyanshi, please take over.
Thank you, Shanil.
Hi.
Welcome. So as we're all innovating during this time of lockdown, the audiences would like to know as to what are you doing at home?
For writers, it's like the tale of two cities. Charles Dickens says it's a worst of time and it's the best of time. This is one of the best times for authors. We are locked down, so there is not much of distraction. I've been writing a lot. In fact, I finished almost 1 book. Second book I'm halfway through in this time, the lockdown period. Not much of shootings and other things happening. As you know, I do screenplays also, but now I'm fully completing all my novels for which I had signed up. So I've been writing a lot and reading a lot. I caught up with my reading too.
Lovely. So what all are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm just rereading. Actually, I had made a list of books to reread, almost 100 books to read and reread, a few which I had missed earlier. So right from the classics to the present contemporary era, I have made a list cutting across all genre. It has thrillers, it has literary fiction, it has horror, it has romance. So I'm just learning my craft, that's all, through reading.
Great. Just yesterday, I had piles and piles of my books that I've get to reorganize. So I was up till 3 a.m. reorganizing and realizing as to how many books I had. Sometimes, thankfully, during this period, I got to realize as to, according to different genres, what I've read over all of these years. And it seems that spirituality and mythology has always been a keen interest to me. And that's when I picked up one of your books as well. I remember a long time back that I'd got Asura. And that was one book which really altered the way that I thought about mythological characters. So especially I would visualize and dream as to, like how the character of Ravan has always been portrayed. So that was me as a reader. What intrigued you so much about the character and what made you write the whole book?
See, I grew up in a place where this is still a part of everyday life. A lot of oral storytelling tradition, classical art forms like Kathakali and all. So my native place near Cochin is a village called Tripunithura. Now it's a part of Cochin city. At that time it was the capital of erstwhile Cochin kingdom. So a lot of temples are there. As I keep saying, there are more temples than necessary. More than 108 temples are there. Very ancient town. So there, these kind of performances were there. So I was fascinated as such with all our Puranas. My childhood was filled with that. In our household, it was a part of everyday debate, like how people used to discuss cricket scores. We used to discuss about Ramayana, Mahabharata, and other things. So Ravana was one fascinating character, and I thought when I decided to write, I thought I will write about what I know. Later, I started writing other things also. What I don't know, also I'm researching and writing. But at that time, I was fascinating, and I started it with Ravana. Later, I wrote a series like Siya Ke Ram. So it was again from Sita's point of view. I wrote the series Mahabali Hanuman. So Hanuman as a hero. At the same time, I was writing Vanara with Bali as the hero. So same epic I approach from all angles. It's not that I write only from the so-called villain or antagonist points of view. Even though out of the 5 books, 4 have been that. One is of course Bahubali, part 1. Other than that, it is Duryodhana's Mahabharata, Ravan's Ramayana, Bali's Ramayana, like that. But in screen, I have always written the conventional way, whether it is Siya Ke Ram or Mahabali Hanuman or Chakravarti Ashoka, which I wrote for. So it's about my passion on Puranas, and I feel that a lot of characters are there which resonates across time, across language, across cultures. These are all immortal characters.
Correct. But the interpretation of characters is very different in the north and the south side. So we see that even the temples are very different. So from all your readings and research, how do you think are these stories different in different parts of our country?
I think Indian history has influenced a lot in how we perceive Mahabharata and Ramayana. It might be controversial to say, but this is my experience. The South has always been, because of geography and other reasons, various other reasons could also be there, was insulated by from inversions, usually. Deep South, if you take places like Kerala or Tamil Nadu, it was never ruled by any pan-Indian, other pan-Indian empires, including Mauryas. It was out of it. Neither did Mughals rule. Mughals and all were 1,500 kilometers away from where we grew up. So there is no influence of the Semitic religions in how we view our Puranas. So I will tell it by an example. We can find that the lynching of Ravan, if I may call it, during Ram Leela, it happens in places where there was Islamic rule. Whereas in the south, or even in the parts where Islamic rule was not there, the Vijayadashmi is a different festival itself. It is about, in Kerala, it is Vidyaram with Saraswati festival. In East, it is Durga Puja. So it is not the same festival. It is not associated with the same legend at all. So we find that the questioning tradition was alive or still alive in the South. Because Hinduism as such is about debating and questioning. It was never about accepting something. There is no commandments like this is what the God said, you have to obey it. There is nothing like that. Because even Gita, even Krishna comes and says something, he is bombarded with questions from Arjuna. It's not that he gives a commandment, right? So questioning is a part of our tradition. What happened is when the Islamic invasion happened, lot of ideas were taken from that. So you don't find a demure Sita in either in original Valmiki Ramayana or in the versions of Ramayana available in the South. Sita questions every moment. Sita is much more bold. Sita, if you see the ancient sculptures in the temples, and most of the temples in the north have not survived because of the invasion. But in south, you can find 1,500-year-old temples, 1,700-year-old temples. You can see even the dress is like now when you depict Sita, you find that she is covering her hair, isn't it? In the sculptures, if you see, they don't cover even their upper body part, either male or female, most of the sculptures. So even the dress underwent a change. How a model woman, or the ideal of a woman should behave, that also underwent a change. So suddenly you find a very submissive Sita in Ramayans of the North. Whereas Sita of the original Valmiki Ramayana and the places where these Islamic rules were not there, the Sita is more confident, more equal to Rama, and you find a different Ramayana. Same is a consideration with other characters like Ravana. So if you go back, who is Ravana? Ravana is nothing other, no one other than Jaya. Jaya and Vijaya are the bodyguards of Vishnu, and they get a curse and they take form of Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, Ravana and Kumbhakarna, and Kamsa and Shishubala in South Indian tradition, Kamsa and Dandavakra in some of the North Indian traditions, whichever way you take. But these are all a part of Leela, as they call. So there is no concept of good versus evil. This is a very Semitic concept. Heaven versus hell, God versus Satan. This is a very Semitic, Islamic, Judaic, Christian concept. Whereas it is about karma and karma bala. So what happens is neither Rama or Krishna escape their karma bala, let alone Ravana. So here we have a lot of characters who enact a play, and that's why this is all called Leela or play.
Wow, that's very interesting to know. Building on that, these days there's a lot more literature available on mythology. How do you think that is reshaping the perspective of young readers or even the coming generations, what all they'll be reading and how their perception towards mythology and these characters will be built? What's your analysis and take on it?
I think there are lots of people writing. I think more people have to write, because finding different versions is a sign of a confident civilization. You stop questioning when your confidence goes. You become just somebody who obeys. The more interpretations come, more people will understand. Somebody had asked, I had attended a lecture sometime back, Gulsar Sahab, someone asked, who is Krishna? Which is the real Krishna? And Gulsar Sahab had said, there are more than 2,000 Krishnas, because there are more than 2,000 poets who have written about Krishna, major poets who have written about Krishna, and each of their Krishna is different. And then he expanded it. There are lakhs of Krishnas, because whoever reads the Mahabharata, they find a different Krishna, their own Krishna. So the more the interpretations come, the more idea we will have, and there is nothing dogmatic about anything about our culture or religion. I believe every single thing has to be observed from all angles to understand it. That is how we learn. So it is a good thing. And second thing I will add, it is not that suddenly Indians have discovered Puranas. No, it is because all these new generation authors are writing in English. Otherwise, in our national languages, India doesn't have one national language, of course. So all the national languages, we have got around 8 classical languages and a lot of other great languages in India. In all of them, all throughout, there have been interpretations and different versions of our Puranas. Now, why the high visibility you are feeling is because people like us read more in English, and a lot of youngsters are in English. So we think there is a deluge of books, but it is a natural phenomenon when Indian English is a new language. This is one among another Indian languages now. So naturally, it also deserves to have its own crop of literature based on Puranas, and that's what is happening now. Nothing more, nothing less.
Great, thank you. Now, along with me, all the readers are curious to know what has been your story and your journey from the first book to all the things that you're currently writing.
See, first book was a work of passion. Not that other books are not work of passions, but first book is like I was working a normal life. It started as a project of boredom, frankly, of the typical middle class life. So I was successful in the conventional sense at that time. I had a government job and I had married. I had just had my daughter and son. Son at that time I was not born, and I had purchased my house. And now I was only 32, 33. Now what became the question? I didn't envisage a life doing the same thing to next until I retire. So one of the tragedies which I put in Asura of human lives is that you dream something and you achieve it. So after that, you don't know what to do. So that became a problem. And then as a work of passion, I started going back to my hobbies. So I started drawing again. I started painting again. Then I started writing. I started in Malayalam. I got a few things published, but Malayalam doesn't pay. That's a hard fact. There are great writers in our Indian languages, but thing is that they won't earn much. And when you are frustrated with your job and all, you think that you will one day write, make it big, and then in my case, it happened fortunately, but an element of luck was there. But otherwise, these are all very tough dream. It is like some kid dreaming that he will one day play in Indian team. One among 130 crore, 140 crore does that, or 11 among that. So you need a lot of luck for it. But there is nothing to stop us from dreaming. So I shifted to English. English, even now I am not very comfortable. I'm more comfortable in Malayalam, but I shifted to English later to up to an extent in Hindi also when I was writing some screenplay, even though so Asura took around 4 or 5 years of research, and almost parallelly I was writing also. So almost 6 years of writing, 2 years waiting for getting it published, 18 rejections. So almost it was a decade-long project. But once Asura became successful, almost now it has almost 6.5 lakh copies sold in 14 languages. Then suddenly what happened is I started getting opportunities from, as I said, I became very lucky. I got opportunities from everywhere. I was called for Siya K. Ram, so I wrote the screenplay without attending any film school. I am not a literature, I am an engineer and a petroleum manager. So I went to writing screenplay, then that became a hit. Then I went for the other screenplays of Chakravarti Ashoka and Mahabali Hanuman. Even many people don't know, few episodes of Adalat also I wrote. Then I wrote for Netflix, I wrote a military show, Battle of Saragadi, Sarfrosh, that I wrote. In between, Bahubali call came. It was like a chain reaction. So then I started working for Bahubali. And in between, along with that, Netflix series was happening. I published Ajaya, which also I was simultaneously researching. Duryodhana's Mahabharata. Then Vanara came, which is becoming a film again on Bali's story. So what happened is I wrote the first book in a decade. In the next 8 years since Asura, it had been a busy 8 years. After that, I have written, so far published 6 books, written 4 books. Those 4 books will be coming in next 2 years. I completed and given, including the one I given. So 10 books, 4 major series, almost 600 episodes. Then writing now one film screenplay, wrote around 300 columns. It has been a busy period after that. Once I came. So it changed from an amateur writer to a professional writing. You don't have the luxury of waiting to sit for the inspiration, and you have to force yourself to be inspired and write.
So which has been one author or a book or a film that has influenced you majorly?
Mahabharata. Yes, sir.
And who is your favorite character from Mahabharata and why?
Mahabharata it's very difficult to say who is the favorite character. Of course, I took Duryodhana's side and wrote because I want to see how it is. Duryodhana is a favorite character. Karna is another favorite character. And Krishna and Shakuni also are favorite characters.
So, what has been your major learning from diving deep into our mythology and the story?
I not dove deep into it. It's a huge ocean. I had just taken a slight bath. Mahabharata, Ramayana and Mahabharata, you can keep writing on it indefinitely. There is no end to it. In fact, I wrote a few short stories based on Ramayana, Women of Ramayana, which is also will be coming out soon. Series of short stories, all from the female perspective. You don't ask me how as a male I am writing from female perspective. Then I will say I wrote from Asura's perspective. I am not Asura, I am not Ravana. So it's all about how you write it. So you can keep churning stories. You see it from each character, it becomes a different story. It becomes a totally different story. So there is, these are the mother lode of stories. They have been inspiring so many writers and poets, some great, some aspiring people like me, some who are, somebody might be writing a masterpiece on it now somewhere. So there is no end to it. It will keep inspiring Indians and Asians. One of the most pleasurable thing was how the books were well received in Indonesia and other places. I think more than Indians, Indonesians have more interest in our Puranas. Every day I keep getting more letters from Indonesia than from India. Only 3 of my books have been published there, the Asura and the 2 books of Ajaya. But they gobble up everything that is written about our Puranas in Indonesia. And also serials also, I think they have seen most of our television serials, not only in Hindi, in other languages also. What is all the mythological serials which had come, that had been translated to Indonesia. So an average Indian would have seen only the Purana serials of Hindi or their respective language. An Indonesian has seen across the languages in India, all the serials. So that is why I said that's a very pleasurable thing for someone outside our country to appreciate our stories. That's a great feeling.
Absolutely. I've been to Bali a couple of times, and the kind of Hinduism that they practice right there. So what I have felt is it's more Vedic. They still have a deep, mysterious relationship with it. And since you've been there, since you know, so can you tell us a little bit more about how they look at our stories and our characters?
See, it is not only about Bali. Indonesia, I think it's a Muslim population, majority Muslim population.
So that's what makes it more interesting, that, like a
But they keep telling, no, by religion they are Islam, by culture they are Hindus. That they keep telling. And I think that is a great model for India to have, if you really see. Indians can be of different faith, but culturally they could be Hindu. That's what Indonesians are showing us. So most of the Indonesian, the ballets and all what they show, all performers are Muslims. Majority of them are Muslims. Bali is a very small part there. 90% of them are Muslims. And they are so deep into it, their knowledge level, their stories are different because it has traveled through seas. But what do you say, how they keep their culture is a very interesting phenomenon. That's what I said. Here, we could be of different faith. We could be be Islam or Christian or Sikh, Jain, Buddhist, atheist. Whatever is, it doesn't matter. What matters is the cultural integration of it, for which Indonesia gives us a very good example. And the funny fact is that for them, it is a borrowed culture, right?
Right.
Still they take pride because that borrowed culture is there 1,500 years back. Whereas for us, it originated here and still we are fighting over it. We are othering others, saying that this is us and you are separate, and we keep dividing the society, and everyone is guilty of it. It's not that you can blame any one side, but it's an unfortunate fact. We had whatever we grew up with. At least there were, even when Doordarshan was only media, there used to be a lot of national integration messages. I think now all those things are gone out of fashion, and it has become now us versus them, and the them keeps changing as per convenience. But it's always there has to be some them on the other side for obvious political reasons, which I don't want to dwell into.
Putting those aside, we can, since everybody has a lot of time these days, and as you said, we need to be culturally same. So how do we learn more about our culture? How do we talk about the culture to our kids? I have a 4-year-old in the house, so I would love to also introduce her to these characters. So I have Amar Chitra Kathas that I try and I show her. Apart from that, what are the different books or different tools that you would recommend parents to use or readers to begin with?
And let me ask you something. How many of us read Ramayana or Mahabharata, and when?
I think for me personally, I'm very attracted to mythological characters.
You didn't get my question.
Long
When
time.
did you first read when did you first read Ramayana or Mahabharata?
When I took a course in world literature, I think in my college, so somewhere around
If you
19.
ask any Indian, nobody has read Ramayana or Mahabharata. A.K. Ramanujan, in his essay, puts this across very beautifully. For Ramayana and Mahabharata, we don't read the books. It is imbibed in us. It is told by our parents, our grandparents, our cousins. So many times when people ask which book I should give, there is no one authentic book for Ramayana. What is the most authentic version of Ramayana? The one your mother says or your father says. That is the most authentic version of Ramayana. Because the purpose of Ramayana or Mahabharata is not to by heart what is kept there. There is no sanctity in those words. I won't subscribe to the claim that there is atom bomb in that and all those things. It is much beyond that. I don't want to make it sound so silly. So there is, it is the values which a mother imbibes to the child. Your child is 4 years, and I think you should not read him out. It's a very Western culture to read out some books. Reading is something which is a he or a she?
She, daughter.
Reading is something, daughter. Okay, reading is something which she has to find herself. You should not even say what book she should read. She'll let her discover herself. Our culture is all about self-discovery. There is no God discovery or obeying of God. It's always the self-discovery. It is. So even Ramayana has to be discovered by oneself. What you can do is what you understand as Ramayana. Don't bother with whether it is correct or not. Whatever you understand as Ramayana, that you have to tell her rather than reading it out from some other book. Reading, as you rightly said, when you are doing it for comparative literature, at that time, let her read it.
Correct.
Stories in India are told. They are told with a lot of love. They are told with a lot of emotions. They are told with a lot of passion. Reading is coming from a writer, it might look awkward, but I consider myself first as a storyteller, and writing stories is just one medium of conveying my stories or ideas. That's why I moved across platforms. Whatever is available now, if it is film, I'll write films. If it is TV, I'll write TV. I will not restrict myself to write only novels, even though I started as a novelist. Because these are all just storytelling media. And second, one of the most concise form of telling story is poetry. there is nothing as distilled and deep as poetry. That is why these are kavyas. They were not written in prose. Why poetry? For a child, if you can sing, sing. I cannot sing without frightening my children. Now they are grown up, they frighten me back. But otherwise, if you can sing, try singing those rather than telling it. This was how traditionally it was told. And then you can pause and explain. Because that conveys more emotion. And it is like an osmosis, the kids will take it. It is not something which has to be imposed. As I said, there are no commandments in our culture. And you may be surprised with the kind of questions the kids will ask. I used to ask a lot of questions to my father. My kids also ask many of things which you will not have answer. It is fun to find it out together. And many of the acts, that is why it is purposefully put in that. Instead of taking this as something which happened in so and so year, like it happened in 2000 BC, 3000 BC, only idiots will fight over it. It doesn't, when Gandhiji was asked the same question, when was Rama born? Where was Rama born? He said, Rama lives in my heart. He was born in my heart. He will remain in my heart. So why am I bothered where, which place, where is Ayodhya, what is Ayodhya? It doesn't matter to me at all. And when Valmiki wrote it and other saints, you have to call them saints, unlike the present day writers, whether it is Tulsidas or whether it is Eruthachan or Kambar or all the poet saints of different languages, they were saints when they wrote it. Am I boring you?
No, no.
When all these when all these saints wrote it, they didn't translate it. They transcreated it. That is why each of the Ramayanas are different. They transcreated it for their culture and their times. So a Kamba Ramayana, which is almost 500 years older than Tulsidas Ramayana, and in Tamil country will appear totally different from a Tulsidas Ramayana written under Mughal rule. Because purpose was different. Not that all of these were great scholars in Sanskrit, so they could have just translated that. But they gave it so that it is useful for the people of those times. So when you are telling the story, it should be useful for this time. So there is nothing wrong in even changing the story as long as you understand the spirit of it. So that is why I said there is no dogma. So when you are telling your kid the story, tell them with, as I said, more than the plot, more than going for authentic. There is no authentic version. Tell it from your heart. That's enough.
So this gives me an interesting project now to put up these stories the way that I enjoy them. And
each of us can have their own Ramayana, or each of us can have multiple Ramayana at different stages of our life. That's how it has evolved.
Absolutely. And it'll be interesting to know as to how my stories and my interpretations of these stories and how I tell to her, it changes over the period of time. So how had you told these stories? I'm sure the books are one ways of you expressing your version of the stories, but what had been your fascination when you first heard them? What was your version of Ramayana and Mahabharata?
See, as I said, there is no one version of mine. I had explained it earlier also.
The earliest version, what was that interpretation? What were those stories?
No, for me, what I did was what they call as point of view literature. Oral storytellers employ this a lot. So I am inspired by a lot of oral storytelling and folk tales. So in folk tale, especially in the South, because I refer that because I grew up there, nothing special. It will be there across the country also. I am talking about what I grew up with. The storyteller, when he is talking about Ravana, he becomes Ravana, and entire story he narrates from his point of view. Then he will give the counter argument for that. So it is like a bouncing ball, it goes. When the Ramayana is told, it goes like a bouncing ball. First it's like a play acting. when they are telling the story, he then at that time he doesn't think, because first itself he makes it clear this is a play, this is Leela. The entire world is Leela, so it is nothing. It's that time itself it's clear this is neither good nor bad, but a debate on what is dharma and what is karma and what is life. That's what it tries to teach, whether Ramayana or Mahabharata. So it is a never-ending debate. It never ends. So Rama gets criticized as much as Ravana. When Ravana speaks, he will tell all the flaws of Rama. So if you are not used to that culture, no, presently what is happening is we should blame to an extent. It did a great service in one part, but to an extent we should blame the Doordarshan Ramayanas, which showed only one version of it. So what happened is many people thought that is the Ramayana, that is also a Ramayana, that's all. And those parents started teaching the kids that version only. And slowly as this, it's inevitable. I'm not saying this should always there, but still now it is reviving. The oral story tradition went away. What happened is it became more or less like any other religious story. Otherwise, this storyteller, often what he does is he enacts as if he is Bali, he enacts as if he is Kumbhakarna, and he abuses Ravana, saying that you did so many mistakes, yet I am your younger brother, I am no Vibhishna, I am no traitor, so I will fight and die for you. Then again, next scene, Vibhishna is talking, he tell entire thing Kumbhakarna says, and says that I will stand with what is right and not who is my brother. That is my dharma. Suddenly you get two definitions of dharma.
Yeah.
That starts make you think who is the right brother in this. Whether Kumbhakarna is right or Vibhishna is right. Life is like that. No, life is about all those choices. So it never ends. The questioning never ends in your mind. And that is how they create so many impact. Once you spoon feed it, yeah, Vibhishna, good brother, Kumbhakarna, bad brother, that's the end of it. Then there is no story. Then it becomes like a moral fairy tale. And that too not Indian fairy tale. Indian fairy tales are very ambiguous, giving the same moral dilemma and thought process. Is a typical European or Western fairy tale where clearly good always wins over evil. Whereas in India, we don't have the concept. One simple question is, Valmiki wrote it, Ramayana. Let us assume Valmiki is the first Ramayana. Even though Valmiki himself says there are countless Ramayanas before him. So let us assume Valmiki, this one particular Valmiki wrote this particular Ramayana. For him, if Rama is the hero, there was no need for him to show the flaws of Rama. Like killing of Bali, he could have easily written, logically I'm asking, he could have easily said he went to Bali and he fought with Bali and killed him.
But
Face to face. Why he should hide behind a tree? He can easily stop Ramayana. After Ravana's death, he and Sita join together and they are happy and they live happily ever after, like any other fairy tale of those old fairy tales. Why he didn't stop there? He brings out each of the flaws of Rama also, along with each of the flaws and virtues of Ravana. So this same case with Vyasa also. He brings out like one of the most dark and deep criticism of Krishna. Vyasa puts it in the mouth of Gandhari after everyone is dead and before Gandhari curses Krishna. And one more interesting fact is all these epics, all the Puranas, Ramayana and Mahabharata, along with all the 18 Puranas and 108 Upa-Puranas and countless other Puranas like Sthala Puranas and other things are closely interlinked. So as I said, they are teaching more about karma and karma phala on one end. Actually in Audible, there is a 16-hour series, talk series, which I had given on Ramayana, analyzing each chapter. It will be coming soon in a month or so. This is just a glimpse of it. So if you are feeling already bored, don't go to that site. Otherwise, you can think about that.
share with us. We'll be
It is a chain. actually. So there is no end, like life, there is no end in our stories. Because it is, if you talk about end, it is as foolish as saying the day end when the sun sets, or the night ends when the sun rises. It keeps happening again and again. Same way, life also keeps happening again and again. It's an infinite symphony. The death is just a pause to accentuate the melody. Now, whatever Rama does in his Rama avatar, whatever mistake he does, he pays a price for it in Krishna avatar. The same Bali comes as Jara and kills him the same way. Rama threatens Varuna, the god of sea, saying that my stone should float. If you think it is ridiculous, but stones cannot float. So Varuna says it's against the nature. Rama says, I don't care. I want to go. I want to reach Sita. So unless you allow the stones which the Vanars put float, then I will evaporate you. There won't be any water. So Varuna agrees for the stones to float. So even now people say in Rameshwaram, you go, some of the stones float. These are all myths. Some of them float, but they might be of its own property. I'm not going to the science of it. In Krishna avatar, the same Varuna comes back and destroys the city made of stones, Dwaraka, and finishes the cycle of what Rama did in that avatar.
Yeah.
So like that, there's one or two examples of it. Like that, countless examples, hundreds of examples you can give where one epic seeds to the another and it seeds back to the first. And then like a massive banyan tree, you can find the what you call the roots of it going into various Puranas and imbibing the entire Indian culture, irrespective of its language, into a complex web of stories and philosophy.
Wow. This has been very interesting, from learning to be a storyteller from my child to all of these different perspectives. I'd never thought about it. Since we have lesser time, let's move on to the questions that audiences would have. Shanil, please take it up from here.
Sorry.
We have, if anyone would like to ask a question to Mr. Neelakantan, you can you can press on the raise your hand button and let me see, does anyone have any questions? Yes, Nilima, you have a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So, Mr. Anandam, I enjoyed your talk and this very interesting, rich history of your writing, epic, mythology, literature. It's pretty much up my street because I'm also working on a book on Radha.
Oh, okay, great.
On Radha Krishna. And just like you, I want to make my story from the point of view of Radha the woman and not Radha the goddess. I want to kind of, peel the layers of what made Radha the most coveted gopi of the so-called man deity. But my question is a bit different. You say that no Indian could have read the Ramayana or Mahabharata. Well, let me introduce myself. I am the first.
No, I didn't say no Indian. All of us would have read. I'm telling, first time you will not have been, you would have heard it first, then only you read it.
Obviously. So rightly, I agree with you that Ramayana, Mahabharata, the epics are all part of our ethos. We have been ingrained in our minds and our bodies and our personalities, just like ABC. So we have grown up with our North India tales of all these epics. So I just wanted to refute that and say that if you think no Indian has read it, I have read it. I have heard it. I have watched it.
I never said no Indians have read it. I said, I quoted A.K. Ramanujan, who said that no Indians read Ramayana or Mahabharata for the first time.
Of course.
Already when they are reading that book, they know about the story. or
Yeah,
the
that may be
characters,
true.
the plot,
And
everything.
I have read Mahabharat happens to be my favorite epic. So I have read it as many as maybe 20 times, and I would never tire of it. And as late as maybe a couple of months ago, I read Ramesh Menon's version of it, which I absolutely adore. But anyway, thank you very much for your insight into this. And I'm quite inspired now to go back to my manuscript.
There are around 1127 at least versions of Mahabharata, and South Indian renditions are at least 27,000 slokas more than the North Indian renditions.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure. And I hope I can live long enough to see a few more of the ones.
And even now they are discovering more versions of Mahabharata. Actually, Bandrakar Research Institute had stopped accepting Mahabharata before they published the critical edition in 1950s.
Okay.
And they considered only 8 languages. So much was pouring out. I don't know how much we have lost.
Why don't you do a nice all India version for us of the Mahabharata? The Anand.
Ma'am, you go to Bandrakar Research Institute website and see the kind of mammoth work they did for 50 years and couldn't compile even 20% before they came out with the critical edition. So it is not something which one man can do, or even hundreds of Pandits can do. I am no Pandit. Even hundreds of Pandits couldn't do it. It is so vast and so varied, and they considered only 8 languages. If you consider all the Indian languages along with all the dialects and folk songs, even many Adivasis have their own Mahabharata, it may number more than 20,000 versions.
Wow.
With each retailer adding his own things into that, you will be entering a quagmire.
No, but the space is open for you, Mr. Anandam. Go ahead. We are waiting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nilima, for your question. The next question is from Avinash. He's saying, as an author, do you think people have a tendency to export their values to the story they write? Or do you think it is unrealistic to expect that someone's past experience doesn't shape it, and that very separate individual experiences make each story unique?
An author, every author will bring himself or herself into his writing. You cannot avoid that. Otherwise, the writing will be very bland. That's my experience. Whether you are writing screenplay, even when you are writing a newspaper column, you have to pour yourself out. So it is your version. It is not the true version or anything. It is your version. Unless you are giving a scientific theorem, which will be universal in art, whether it is poetry, whether it is sculpture, whether it is writing, painting, drawing, it is the creator. That is why it's called creative art. No, the creator has to be there inside that. Otherwise, it will not have the soul. So my version of Ramayana and Mahabharata is mine alone at that particular point of time. It will even change and evolve because we keep evolving and changing every moment.
Correct, correct. No, great, thanks. We have another audio question. We can take an audio question now. Radhika Pandit, we have Radhika Pandit online.
Hey. Is my voice audible?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Please tell me.
Okay. I had 3 questions, if we have time to address. My first question was, I'm very interested and fascinated with the etymologies used in Mahabharata and Ramayana. With every character, their name itself defines their characteristics. So I would want you to throw some light on that. The second is, that all 3 are very different questions. The second question I had was, very little I have heard about ladies attaining enlightenment. I don't have much knowledge on that. And being a lady myself, I wanted to explore that more and know more on that. If there is some place where I can read up a little more on that. And third is, I wanted to know whose interpretations of Gita would you recommend the most for us to read?
Okay. See, etymology, answering one by one, etymology in Sanskrit, most of the Sanskrit literature, every name will have a story behind it. So that itself is worth a 500, 600 book. Like why Meghanada was named, because when he was born, he had, yesterday I had put in my social media, yesterday or day before, I had put a quiz question. How did each of the character cry when they were born? Based on that, their names were there. So Duryodhana cried in a particular way. They say they cried like a donkey, brayed like a donkey, and Ashwatthama cried like a horse. Meghanada in Ramayana like thunder or lightning and thunder. So everything, like even the name Krishna, the dark, meaning black, also has another meaning called what is expansive, which comes from the root of Vishnu. Vishnu itself, now people may, it is a stretch, but people may say it is your Big Bang theory where the universe is expanding and Krishna says he is the universe, he is the time, he is the space, and it keeps expanding. That is why it's called Vishnu. And black is the color of infinity. So it itself is worth writing a 500 or 1,000-page book. Each of the names have some meaning. Like Nemi was the correct name of Dasharatha. Since he can control 10 chariots, he was called Dasharatha. Like that, infinite number of examples are there. So quickly answering your second question, enlightenment, it was not gender specific in the earlier literature. In Vedic era, you can find there are at least 27 Vedic poetess who had contributed to our Vedas. You hear about Gargi, you hear about a lot of Vedic scholars among the women. But later in the medieval era, like any other religion, this became this became very priest-centric. Once the priests take over the religion, what happens is that it becomes very patriarchal. Then the women, even in Buddhism it happened, women didn't have any right for enlightenment. But was this accepted by all? It wasn't. That is why the Bhakti era came, and Bhakti became a method to get enlightenment. So we have a series of Bhakti poets. Most of them are women, from Abhayar to Mirabai to Akka Mahadevi to, we have a plenty of women poets in the medieval era who fought against the patriarchy and this male chauvinism. This was the same period when the casteism also became rigid, and the priests started interpreting anything as they wished. Most of my books are against both this patriarchy and the casteism, because I found that this has been misutilized by a lot of priests for their own selfish purpose. So both the Shudras, what they called as Shudras, and anyone, the so-called people below that, Dalits, and the women, irrespective of their caste, they could be who have been born in a Brahmin family, they didn't have the right for reading Vedas, enlightenment. It became like that. There were exceptions, but it became a kind of rule because of this rigidity. That is where we started thinking that women don't have the right of enlightenment up to Indian Renaissance movement, which once again broke away with all these things, which started in Bengal and then it started spreading across the country, and still it is going on, where again a kind of revival is happening and back to the roots perhaps. But the in-between period, the medieval period, like most countries, ours also is very dark, priest-centric, dogmatic, casteist, and patriarchal. So that is why there is nothing, if you go by Vedas or Upanishads, that says that women cannot achieve enlightenment. That is One point. Second point, there is no clear definition of what is enlightenment. And I keep asking many gurus.
What's
Recently,
the
I had
most
met.
interesting answer you've gotten on that?
Which one?
What's the most interesting answer that you've gotten on this question?
Frankly, none of the answers have satisfied me. They say they see life with greater clarity. Is what Sadhguru, when I met him last time, he answered me. I had interviewed him, but I was not satisfied with that answer. There are other interpretations. Swami Chinmayananda told something. Across the years from Buddha onwards, most of the answers have been evasive. They answer it through allegory. They say, how will you define sweet? You can only experience it. You are eating a laddu. How do you explain someone who has never eaten a laddu how it is? Enlightenment is that. That is a very evasive answer, but that is a very logical answer also. This is what they give. I am not enlightened. But my another question which I keep asking all these gurus is, okay, you got enlightenment. Now what? What is the big deal? So that also I not got a proper answer. There are many convenient answers, not any satisfactory answers. And I am not someone who will be satisfied with satisfactory answers or convenient answers. As I said, I had to find it myself. I have not found it so far. So that is the answer to your question. But there is nothing caste-centric, birth-centric, race-centric, national-centric, or even national-centric, gender-centric, or even human-centric about enlightenment. That's what I will say. Now answering, what was your third question? Gita.
Interpretation of Gita, yes.
Gita's interpretation, my interpretation is the dearest one to me. And I expect everyone to interpret Gita in their own way. No other interpretations what you get, a lot of great scholars have done it. I had extensively read both of Chinmayananda and of Vivekananda's. But these are all like milestones or what he calls a signpost when you drive. You should not carry them. It will be ridiculous. The signposts are telling the truth. When you are traveling through highway, driving through highway, the signposts are not lying. They are true. But that signposts are only a guidance. It will be as foolish to carry all these interpretations in your car by taking out all the signposts and putting it in your car and traveling. It will be as foolish as that to take the interpretations of various scholars about Gita. The traveling you have to do alone. You have to use only this as the milepost. So I will say, so far what I understood of Gita, that is my interpretation. Whether it is a right interpretation, it is right for me. And that is what Krishna also says to Arjuna. I have revealed what is the greatest secret, the wisest thing as far as he knows. But it is up to you to use your logic and accept it or reject it. So when Krishna himself is giving a choice to Arjuna after giving this entire Gita, who are we to say this is the right version of Gita unless you interpret it yourself?
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will move on to the next question from Cecil. She says, as an author who has worked across different mediums, an author, a storyteller, screenplay writers, which is the one that you find most challenging?
Most challenging is writing short stories. That's what I thought until I started writing children's story.
Oh.
So now I say most difficult is to write children's story. So that is why I have a lot of admiration to my parents, mothers especially, who tell great stories to their children. I find it very difficult to write children's stories. I just finished one. Second one I am writing now. It's a ridiculous thing because I have signed up for next 6 books for which I have taken advance, spent that also. But I am not writing that. I have not got any advance for children's book. Just for the heck of writing it, I am sitting and writing children's book. Because I found it very challenging.
Okay, great. So maybe now we can have an audio question.
Yeah.
I think just 1 second. Last week, this will be the last audio questions.
You can follow me in my social media @it's Anand Neel. You can send me questions to my mail also. My website is there, anandneelakandan.com. I will answer it at my convenience. I will not answer it immediately, but in 10-15 days, I will answer all your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so
I am
much.
not able to answer any questions now.
No, we'll take the last question from Pooja Bagga. Let's take that as the last question in the interest of time.
Okay. No, that's what I said. In case
Yeah.
somebody wants to ask.
Yeah, so my question is, why do you think mythology still holds relevance today, especially from women's point of view? Like, there are newer, better versions of Sita, and I just recently read a version of Urmila from Kavita Kane, from Urmila's point of view. So why do you think today's women, relate or resonate with the mythological characters? Why do you think they still hold relevance? So I would like to know your take.
Nothing special about today. As I said, it is being written in English. Most of us are convenient in English. It is a pan-Indian language. So the visibility is higher. This for last 3000 years in different languages of India have been writing it from all points of view, and the storytellers have been telling it from every point of view all throughout, and they are not mythology, they are our living culture. So that is why they are relevant. The mythology is what you call the stories of a dead culture like Greek. They are great stories and it was a great civilization, but I will tell it in past tense, it was. Norse mythology is they give great stories, but again, it is in the past. Ours is a living tradition. So that is why it will get, what is dead never changes. What is living keeps evolving. That is why you are finding more and more interpretations, and you find it interesting, the modern interpretations interesting, because you are living in modern times. Every time it was written, it was interesting for the people who were living at that era. And all the poets, saints had written it suiting to their time, their culture and their language.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Now I'll ask Pooja to give a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Shanil. On behalf of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, Mangal Bagh Gallery, Karma Foundation, SRS Women of Ahmedabad, and Divya Bhaskar, I would like to thank Anandji for sharing his writing journey with us and also his in-depth sight into mythology. Personally, my takeaway is the fact that I love the way you said that, every mythology, you can completely take it up to your perception, whether it is Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata. I think that is my takeaway for today. And Priyanshi, thank you for being a great conversationalist. And also, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, especially with the coronavirus going on. And please be safe. And thank you once again, Anandji, for this beautiful session we have had today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.